Welcome back. It's another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. We got a good one today. We're joined by a fellow YouTube personality coming from the carrier side of the industry. We'll get to Avante Jackson, aka CDL Shorty, in just a minute here. But if you're brand new, make sure to check out all of our other content, either on YouTube or on freight360.net, including the Freight Broker Basics course. That's a educational bit we put together in conjunction with DAT for anybody who's starting a brokerage from scratch, or if you're looking for some training material for your team when you're bringing on some new team members. Make sure to share, like, subscribe, leave us comments and questions. We answer your questions on our Tuesday edition of the Final Mile. Ben, how's things in Florida?
Man, love this time of year. It's starting to get cool. Weather's turning.
Excellent.
It's like our cooler summer. I was telling someone yesterday, I'm like, yeah, we got 2 seasons down here, like really hot, miserable summer, and then 10 months of like very nice summer. So
there you go.
Well, you'll be down here soon, right? Aren't you coming down next week?
Yeah, I'm coming. We're heading down this weekend we'll be there next week just to kind of hang out. No Disney World, thankfully,
No Disney.
So I can actually relax. So, but all right, without further ado, CDL Shorty. It is Avante Jackson, but he goes by CDL Shorty. Welcome to the show, man. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me. I truly appreciate it.
So I want to ask you. You had reached out to us a couple of weeks back, wanting to come on the show. We, a lot of times Ben and I talk brokerage. I haven't worked on the carrier side in over a decade, so my ability to speak from a carrier's perspective is not current. And Ben, you more recently have worked on the asset side, but more so in brokerage lately. But Avante, I'm curious, what made you decide to reach out to us and say, hey, I wanna come on and kind of give my perspective?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking me. What made me want to come on? Well, what made me reach out to you guys in the first place was, first of all, I like what you guys have going on. I love the show. I'm a fan of the show. You guys definitely go in depth, of the broker side. And I just feel like, I'm an advocate for the drivers. I'm an advocate for the carriers. And I feel like everybody's blaming everybody. You got the brokers blaming the carriers and the carriers blaming the brokers. But if we can sort of bridge this gap by having these type of conversations and collaborations, then I feel like we as a industry in totality will definitely get better.
Yeah, I remember one of the first episodes I ever did on this podcast was in late 2019. And we were me and the guy I was doing it with at the time, we were talking about like predictions for 2020. And clearly, like, none of us saw COVID coming. So like we were way off either way. But one of the things that I said that I hoped would happen was that the animosity between brokers and carriers would go away. Like you just said, there's, it's kind of like this is it the Spider-Man meme where like everyone's like pointing at each other, like brokers are pointing,
Yeah.
right? Brokers are pointing at carriers and carriers are pointing at brokers, and you get dispatchers in there, and it gets all messy. So yeah, that's good. We're glad to have you on. We have a lot of stuff we can talk about today. We're gonna hit on some things like rate transparency, double brokering, the use of freight guards and reporting on one another. So I do, Ben, unless you have anything you want to kick off with, I was going to ask a couple questions.
Our way.
All right. So for those, we got to talk with you last week, so we understand like your background and kind of what your role is right now. You do, you're a carrier advocate. You do CDL training. Is that correct?
Yes,
For
sir.
new drivers. So in the current state of things, right, where we've got what feels like a record length of rates being extremely suppressed, which nobody wants. Brokers don't want it either. I know we had a lot of comments. I think it was like in the last week on our YouTube, someone was like, "Oh yeah, great, you guys, you finally are going to have to start paying, higher rates instead of those bottom of the barrel, drivers that you guys are booking." And the reality is, like, we don't want rates to be low. Like, we're a margin, our earnings are margin based too, right? So like if rates are normalized and brought back up to a standard level, like everybody does better, right? So I'm curious in the current state of things, like suppressed rates. There's all kinds of fraud now. What is it like in the perspective of the carrier side of the equation, where um, we're dealing with all this crap that's out there right now, and it's hard to even make money. So what's it like from the driver's perspective or a carrier's perspective, overall in general? I guess it's a broad question, but just kind of curious for you to paint the picture for us.
Yeah, well, I used to be one of those guys, one of those carriers, that, would be like, man, the brokers are taking all the money, suppress rates, all of that. But I really had to sit back and do some research and some homework and things of that nature and kind of change my mindset, because what we see and what we have going on right now in the current climate, market, economy is, you know, we have to just be honest with ourselves as drivers, and as brokers or people in the industry. The economy has taken a downturn. Shippers aren't making that much commodities right now. And with that being said, that's where your suppressed rates come from. I used to be the one that be like, oh man, no, the brokers are keeping the money, the shippers aren't paying. But then you have to really sit back and look at the economy. No, the shippers aren't paying because they're not making much anymore. Americans are not buying much stuff anymore. Many commodities being shipped out anymore. So from that standpoint, I had to change my mind. Number one, and then number two, you know, you see the influx of truckers that have come into the industry from 2020 to now. You have to change your mindset as a carrier and as a driver to say, hey, my trucker buddy, my trucker friend, that is my competition. Yeah, we can do things, we can be buddy buddy and things of that nature, but at the end of the day, this is a business. So you have to, kind of weed out that perspective and look at things from a different mindset, a different perspective.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Um, all right. So one of the things that I'm curious on, or I guess I want to point out, is there's very likely a difference in, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's very likely a difference in the amount of like data and where we get our information from on the brokerage side versus your typical small carrier. I'm thinking back to when you were talking about suppressed rates. So, and the concept of quote unquote like the brokers keeping all the money, right? So, as brokers, and Ben, you and I have seen this for years and years now, right? Like we see rate data change on a daily level, we see it weekly, seasonally, and then obviously in the big market cycles. And a lot of brokers, we don't sit behind the wheel, right? We sit behind a keyboard and a computer, so we have access to see the news articles and the rate data and the analysis on all that stuff, and what's the different factors that are impacting it. And like you mentioned, the demand to ship, right? That's one side of the equation that comes into pricing, is how many truckloads, to just generalize it, how many truckloads of freight need to be moved. And then the other side is the supply, and that's how many available trucks are there at any given point in time. And we saw supply massively increase post-COVID shutdown, and we've seen the demand to ship cut back when domestic manufacturing and shipping has just kind of the spigot got turned off. So I'm curious if you think my analysis is accurate, that the average trucker probably doesn't spend as much time getting their information on what's causing rates to do what they're doing, if they're spending as much time in the same sources as brokers are. Because my guess would be that if I'm an owner operator and it's just me in my truck, where am I getting my information? It's probably social media, maybe a news article, and just water cooler talk at a truck stop. Whereas brokers spend a lot of time on a computer, reading news articles, seeing rate data, etc. Do you think there's any accuracy to that, or do you think carriers are getting their information from? I guess the carriers that are claiming brokers are just stealing all of our money, are they getting their information from somewhere else? I mean, what do you think the disconnect is there?
Well, for me, like if you go up and you ask the average trucker, that's why I consider myself the trucker's voice, a trucker's advocate, because I'm trying to educate my community. So for me, I look at things like jury. I get on Marine time. I see what containers are coming over, the price of the containers and things of that nature from big box corporations.
Are you sitting on hundreds of thousands in old, uncollected invoices, 2, 3, even 4 years old? Don't write them off. You could be losing big money right now. Meet Christina Belival, Texas's #1 freight debt collection attorney. She's recovered over $20 million across 1,700 cases using legal muscle that forces deadbeats to pay you, usually within 30 to 90 days. She's the powerhouse behind some of Texas's biggest carrier and factoring companies. There's no fees until she collects. Your competitors are already calling for their free account review. Don't let another day of your money slip away. If you've got a claim in Texas, visit freightcollectionsolutions.com or call 346-525-2229. Call now before the deadbeats disappear with your cash forever. You've seen the headlines. Freight fraud isn't going anywhere. But if you're a QuickScope customer, you're not seeing it in your business. QuickScope is a cutting-edge, load-level visibility tool that stops fraud before it starts, right where it happens, inside the transaction, no noise, just results. With unlimited usage and by far the most cost-effective product on the market, QuickScope delivers real value without the bloated price tag or platform confusion. And here's the kicker. Version 2 of QuickScope drops this summer, packed with powerful new features and AI integrations that'll make your visibility game even stronger. Sign up today and you'll be locked in at today's pricing when version 2 goes live. Stop chasing fraud. Start stopping it. Visit quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE and learn more.
So I do things like that. If you ask the average trucker, carrier, whatnot, what tender load rejection is, where do they get that from? Where do you see your data from? They don't know. A lot of them, they don't know. And a lot of it is
A lot of brokers don't as well, to be fair.
Most.
No, but you're making a good point, yeah.
A lot of it is water cooler talk at a truck stop. Everything. I've said this to a lot of people that kind of get mad at some things that I say online. A lot of things that I say, a lot of my rhetoric that I speak from my YouTube channel and whatnot are just things that other truckers are saying at truck stops, or just conversations that are being had at truck stops. But I really learned throughout these last couple of years that, you know what, some truckers, not all, some truckers are a little bit ignorant, as well as some brokers. So my whole thing is, let me dive deep into the conversation. Let me start doing my due diligence by going on these websites, printing out this data. I got stacks and stacks of paper, and I go out to the truck stops and I hand them out to any trucker that wants it, because the narrative is all carriers are dumb, all truckers are dumb, and I hated that. And I just wanted to educate my people.
And I want to ask a question about that. So, do you think, from like a driver's point of view, right, and talking to carriers, do you think that it is a level playing field of competition amongst just the carrier side, right? Do you think everybody's operating, and I'll say specifically, under hour of service guidelines? Do you think everybody that is competing for freight, right, on the carrier side is all driving the standard hour of services that should be mandated through like the ELDs, for example? Like, what is the opinion of drivers on whether or not everyone's following the rules or not? Because I've heard so many different things where legitimate carriers are like, look, it's the law. Everybody's driving under the hour of service laws. And then Nate and I are interviewing and working with folks like Danielle we've had on the show and researching and finding like massive disparities where carriers are violating ELDs, driving 20 hours a day. I mean, the Hope Trans accident was a really big example of that. One guy on a team load for the USPS that had driven like 20 some hours 2 days in a row fell asleep. So does from the carrier side and just like the conversations at truck stop, do they believe it's a level playing field where the guy's doing it the right way, right? And you train CDL drivers, right? Do you think you're also competing against folks that just are doing whatever they want as long as they can get away with it?
Oh, of course, of course. There is not a level playing field. I mean, we can all see right now with the whole conversation and the talk about non-domicile and domicile CDLs, which I have a love-hate relationship with that conversation. But yeah, but even with the people that are non-domicile, you still have mega carriers out here that are running double E logs. I I have a few friends that, work for these mega carriers, and they'll sit there and they'll tell me, and not just tell me, they'll show me whenever they're in town and I get to see them. I'll come to the truck and they'll show me to where they can just make a phone call and say, hey, I'm out of hours, and they'll switch it over to like a ghost person or a dummy person.
Yeah.
That way that they can, run more hours. But I think the real conversation is, because the ELDs was implemented in 2016 under the Obama administration, but did the ELDs really help truckers, or did it hurt truckers? I think that's the real conversation.
I
Yeah,
think the stat is they hurt the whole industry,
yeah,
including
Danielle did a
safety,
lot of research on
everything.
it, and
Like,
it was
absolutely
intended
terrible.
to increase safety, and there's
Did the
really not a
worst.
lot of hard evidence that can say that actually happened. So
Yes.
and like
It
I get
actually
it.
looks
I
like it got
remember
worse.
when I worked for a trucking company, like it was paper logs, right? And like people, you draw that line and you up, right? You do that whole thing, and like dude, guys would drive around with 2 sets of logs. Like it was
But
that simple. But I mean, if you can fake it that easily with paper logs, and then you just advance technology and you have ELDs, you can hack an ELD. Like it, and there's no, they're self certified, right? There's not like a government or third party mandated organization that has to certify these providers. And we see like it's like every week there's another article of an ELD provider that's being scrapped because they're being used for fraud or whatnot. So,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
think
See,
Ben, you brought up a good point. Like within the driving community, and we see this with brokers too, right? We become our own like worst enemy, right? We got there's bad actors in both buckets there. It's the same thing with dispatchers, right? There's like been bad rhetoric around independent dispatchers where the good ones can really add good value to small carriers and to brokers. But you got the bad ones that get all the spotlight. So
yeah. See, my thing. I would just like to add to that a little bit. My thing is, there's on the carrier side, there's no uniformity amongst the whole industry on the carrier side. Like we're heavy regulated when it comes to safety, but you still have guys out there that are legally able to run paper logs because DOT said this. You can have. They used to have these things called glider kits, right?
yep,
Where
yep.
where I can go buy a truck without the motor. But now, and even when ELDs was implemented, you could go and buy a 2021 truck. But if that motor is 2006 or below, I could still run paper. With me
Isn't it
being stuck
99?
99, yes, 99, and I think 2003, I'm sorry, 2003 and below, and 99. It first was 99, and then I think they upped it to '03. But then as someone like, let's say me for instance, if doing an example, if I'm on e-logs and then my friend is on paper, then of course he can make more money and run longer than I can. So that's not, when we talk about uniformity and fairness, that's not fair.
Yeah.
Well,
Agreed.
the
Ben, what do you
thing
got?
the thing that I found super fascinating is like I was unaware of how bad this was. Like we kind of knew, like you had said and Nate said, like we'd hear from folks, hey, like these logs are getting manipulated, talking to carriers. And again, like I honestly probably have more friends and colleagues on like the carrier side and driver side that I still talk to that I've worked with since the beginning of my career that I'll call every now and then, tell me what's going on. And like they're saying like it was more and more prevalent. But when we got into this with like Justin and Danielle and had Gordon on the show and like really looked at how prevalent it was, just how often it was happening, a lot of things to me started to click. Because the other thing I had seen in the past couple years that I've never seen since I've been in the industry is I would have brokers telling me they're arguing with shippers over transit times, saying like their drivers, hey, I can book this load for the rate the customer wants, but they're going to do 900 miles a day or 850. And I'm like, where are they driving from? And my first question, I'm like, are they like driving, through like the Dakotas where there's like literally no traffic, no cities? Like, I'm like, okay, maybe if you're driving through the desert, you could probably get that kind of mileage once in a while. I'm like, but to do that every load in areas like Atlanta, where there's cities, where there's traffic, I'm like, that's like mathematically and physically impossible to keep doing if you're driving 11 hours a day. And like they're arguing and they're going, look, hey, showing me the carriers, showing me the emails. And I'm like that can't be true. And then it started happening so much that I'm like, something doesn't add up. Like that doesn't add up. And the rates also made no sense where shippers were sending back lanes to us that I would review. And this is a major food shipper. I was telling Dean this last week. I did a bid for them like a couple months ago. We're talking like 3,000 lanes, very well known company. And I quoted all of this freight like below DAT average on the lanes we were like a fit for. So like none of our pricing was even remotely high, if not below where the market should be. And this is like reefer perishable freight. The feedback to us is we were just like 25 to 35% too high on every lane. And I went back and looked at it and I'm like, even if you looked at historic and predictive rates, I'm like, I'm still almost like the lowest range that should happen for this. And they're telling me every single one of these are like 30% too high. I'm like, who is submitting rates? Because like Nate and I talked to carriers, like, what is the break even cost to run a trucking company? And I'm like, these are lanes at like $1.25 a mile across the board. And I'm like, how is this major company shipping all this freight for rates that absolutely make no sense, right? And then you hear from the people we talked to going, oh yeah, like I got guys that'll run it for that, but it's got to go 900 miles a day. And then the last piece that kind of fell into place was like how prevalent ELD manipulation was. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. Now this is starting to make sense. Other carriers are driving way longer than they should and undercutting the legitimate carriers. Because then all the bankruptcies were coming from the legitimate carriers. All the ones that had good maintenance, good training programs, or doing things the correct way are getting pushed out of business because they can't operate at that low cost. And then we're seeing all of these folks and the drivers and like running without insurance, deferred maintenance, trucks that shouldn't be on the road, not training their drivers more than like 2 weeks before they put them on the road. And then they're manipulating the logs. And you're like, okay, well, like this is not a level playing field at all. And this is really what is causing rates to stay that low, because otherwise, in the 40 years our industry existed, they never stayed that low for longer than 12 months because enough companies go out of business that freight stops moving and shippers have to pay more, right? Everyone always kind of looks at the brokers in the middle, but at the end of the day, there's just companies that need to pay to move stuff and a vehicle that is able and willing to move it for that rate. If nobody moves it, eventually they will pay more money. But if someone else goes and moves it for that cheap rate, the shipper has no reason to ever pay more money. And like, I know everyone looks at the intermediaries as like taking profit out of the middle, but at the end of the day, like we don't really control the market. We just help them find trucks willing to do the work for what they're wanting to pay for. And trucks just kept booking loads. And I'm just like watching this going like, this makes no sense to me how trucks keep booking loads at this volume on what shouldn't be profitable, right?
Now, I'm glad that you said that, because this is why I wanted to have this conversation and bring more awareness to the forefront between brokers and carriers. Because with that point that you pointed out, we need to have a conversation of predatory brokers out there. Like, come on, man. Like, we talk about the ELD and the safety, but how many times will you have and this is where I want to separate the good freight brokers from the bad freight brokers, because how many times would you have a freight broker to say, oh, wait a minute, mathematically, you're not going to be able to do that load in the right time if you're on the ELD.
In freight, time is money, and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes.
They don't care about it being on the ELD or not. They just care, can you get that load from point A to point B in a timely manner? They don't even really care about safety. And I'm saying them as far as the shipper, the broker, and the carrier, because if you can't do that safely, in a good timely manner on an ELD, you're not going to be able to do it safely at all. It's going to be unsafe. So then you're putting people at harm's way. You're not getting the carrier's not getting rest and things of that nature. So, when are we going to have the conversation of predatory brokers? And then also, it's not your job as a broker to know, what my operating cost is, but also how about on a good freight broker standpoint, how about if a carrier is saying, oh man, I can take this load for $1 a mile or 95 cents a mile. Now, what I say might not make sense, but let's try to make it make sense. If you get a carrier that says that, it wouldn't that be somewhat of a predatory broker? Because I'm saying, oh wow, I get this dumbass carrier to do this for cheap, and this carrier like that right there, which makes the rate suppressed as well too, because good and well you're not making money at 95 cents a mile, at $1 a mile,
Well,
and there's a lot of
here's the question.
predatory. Yes, sir.
Okay, so here's let's go through a scenario, right? So
Mm-hmm.
let's say Nate's a broker, I'm a broker, right? And a
Yes, sir.
customer both gives us a load and says,
Uh-huh.
"Hey, we ran this yesterday, this load for $1 a mile." Let's just use your example, right? And they go,
Uh-huh.
"Hey, can you move this for $1 a mile?" And Nate and I go, "Well, that's probably too low. We'll see if there's any carriers." Both Nate and I put a post on a load board and reach out to our carriers and go, "Hey, we got a load moved from this customer. It doesn't have to go today, but they're looking to be at $1 a mile." And then literally 35 carriers email both Nate and I and go, "I'll take that load for $1 a mile." How, one, Nate and I can't tell anything other than does the carrier have insurance? What is their safety rating? And are they willing to take it? And then we can verify the VIN, but like we can't see logs. We can't see whether or not that carrier wants to take that load because, hey, they just need to reposition their truck to go get a load from their customer and they're going to make some money instead of driving there dead or empty. And they're like, "Hey man, like this load works for me. I got to get to Memphis. So like I'll take the buck a mile. It fits in my schedule and I'll take that one today." And then you hear that from like 30 carriers. From Nate and our point of view as a broker, the customer saying they paid this yesterday. We can see it in their RFP. A bunch of carriers are saying they're willing to do it. I mean, are Nate and I supposed to go back to the customer and go like, "Well, we have 30 people that all said they could. The math doesn't seem to work, but they're willing and able to do the work." And the customer's going, "Well, yeah, here's the load." How, if you were in our position, would you discern from literally dozens of carriers saying they're willing to run that rate for what should be less than profitable?
Well, that goes back to what I was saying when I was saying, like, if my trucker buddy, me and my trucker buddy were not friends in business, that's literally my competition, number one. He might have different bills than I have, but at the same token, we're both cutting each other's throat. That's number one. So, it has to be a way to where we as carriers can soften that blow. It doesn't always have to be cutthroat. And then number two, if you have 30 carriers, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you have 30 carriers that are saying this and saying, yeah, I'll take it. How many do you vet on highway that you look at their CSA scores like, ooh, this is not a good
All of
carrier?
them.
All of them.
Yeah,
100%.
Okay.
all of
Yeah.
them.
Well,
100% of
again,
them.
I'll add in here, and I'm going to oversimplify this. Like you said,
Mhm.
there's good brokers and there's bad brokers, right?
Mhm.
Bad brokers likely are not using sophisticated software and vetting procedures that the good brokers are using. And again, I'm way over generalizing this, but just for the sake of conversation. But I would like Ben and myself having been doing this for a while, and a lot of the larger reputable brokerages out there, 100% of them are running every single carrier through a system like Highway or My Carrier Portal or Carrier Sure, RMIS, whatever the case might be, because they're integrated directly into the TMS to the point where the broker is not physically able to send a rate confirmation to a driver without them going through those processes. And there's rules set in place. Again, those are the good brokers, right? You might have someone that just got their authority last week, isn't using any of these tools, and yeah, there's nothing stopping them from just being like, "Oh yeah, I'll book you and I'll email you a confirmation," and they don't do any research on them or anything whatsoever. So there's nothing legally stopping them. But in general, the brokerages that sustain and last for a long time are using tools and technology, and it's not just to find out safety scores. It's also to protect them from cargo theft and double brokering
Yes.
and other forms of fraud. But yeah, out of those, to answer your question, out of those 30, 100% of them are going to be run through a vetting platform if the broker is acting, is in that bucket of good broker
Responsible.
versus bad broker.
Yeah.
And I would
Now,
say this
I'll
too. I want to
I
layer
was,
on one thing into your other point, though, real quick.
mhm,
The other
mhm.
point we're talking about rates, right? The thing that I think is also harder to do in the industry is that from like a trucking company's point of view, like I've run trucking companies and worked on the carrier side, is that like you're not always going to be profitable above your average break even for every load, right? Just like take a tanker load, for example, right? They are literally driving empty to their pickup. So they're not getting
Yes.
paid at all, right? From point A to B to just get loaded. And then they're making most of their money on the backhaul, right? And the same thing is true in reefer, right? Like a reefer driver, say they're running watermelons during watermelon season out of Florida, they might make $4 a mile going from Florida to whatever, Tennessee, but then they might take dry freight for $1 a mile to get back into Florida to get four
Or
bucks a
drive
mile coming
empty.
back out, right?
Yeah.
Or drive
Mhm.
empty because all the money's in the front haul. So like there's not an equal relationship in loads saying that like front haul and back haul rates are typically different because when there's demand for trucks and produce is just an easy example, and rates get inflated. So the carriers, like that's why you'll see the rate outbound to Florida during produce season go to $3 a mile and the inbound rate go to 90 cents a mile because the carriers know they're getting paid coming out and they got to get in and get as much as they can, even if they can cover the fuel because they're still profitable, but you're not going to see the profitability on a lane by lane basis. You're going to see it on front haul versus like back haul.
Mhm.
And to add to that, put it in the broker's perspective. If we have an annual contract with a shipper directly and we guarantee a set rate for 12 months, there are going to be times of the year where we're having average profitability. There's going to be times of the year where we're losing a good amount of money. And there might be times of the year where you might have a load like the pink cheetah or the TQL example, right? Where if you look at one specific, if your sample size is one load, right, which is I think a
Mhm.
terrible sample size, it might show 40% margin. But what are
Mhm.
the other? What if you were to take 1,000 loads and analyze them? What does it look like? And I think that's where I kind of just want to get into rate transparency, if you guys don't mind, unless you have anything else you want to talk about on that part. But I think
Well,
the
my
yeah, go
my
ahead.
my last point on that, not to cut you off, my last point on that would be, would it be somewhat of the carrier's decision, the 30 carriers that called you guys, would it be somewhat on their decision to call the factoring company and check the broker's credit?
So that's
To,
actually before we do transparency, I do want to hit on this part, right? I want to talk
okay.
about how carriers are vetting brokers out. Um,
Oh, gotcha.
so I mean, so you're saying your question was, should the carrier be asking their factoring company about the credit worthiness of the broker? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, the credit worthiness of the broker in that example that you guys had said you posted a load for example, posted a load for $1 a mile and you had 30 carriers, because to me that's like all carriers are jumping on one thing, and saying, "Oh, we could take it," but also they're not checking the credit worthiness of a broker as
It
well.
happens
You
in
know.
two ways usually. From the carrier's
Mhm.
point of view, they're going to see the credit score of the broker on DAT before they reach out. So at least they can
And days to
see
pay, yeah.
the Ansonia report numbers on DAT or truck stop. Hey, this broker has credit and what their average days to pay. The second step is if they go to get that load, when they get onboarded with the broker, that carrier's factoring company, that carrier is going to go into RTS, for example, into their website, put in the broker's MC, and RTS is going to say approved or not approved to work with this broker. So they can see it and then they'll verify it with their factoring company's website before they get onboarded with the broker. Then they're going to get the agreement with the broker to now move forward to do business. But the
Mhm.
third step is the one that I think is what causes the most issues in fraud, which is RTS will verify that that broker has credit. But what carriers can also do to prevent fraud for themselves, right? Like just literally protecting themselves from being involved in any type of fraud is just looking up the phone number for that brokerage, calling the main number and saying, "Hey, I got a rate con. I want to verify the load number and that I'm working with you guys." Because if you call that main number, they are going to tell you, "Hey, that person on that rate con, yes, works here. And two, that is one of our load numbers." That one small step would probably prevent 90% of the fraud on the carrier side, where they think they're working with a legitimate broker like TQL or even CH Robinson, but it's really somebody in Azerbaijan that just created a fake rate con and a fake email told the carrier, the legitimate carrier, hey, you're working with TQL and it's a completely different load number. That guy doesn't really work there. Then they run the load and find out 45 days later that they're not getting paid. So like that one phone call of like call it a third step of credit or verification is like the one thing that if I was a driver or a carrier or a dispatcher, like I would make that phone call on almost every single load and just really quickly going, hey, just want to make sure this rate con's legitimate, that you guys sent this load over. We're just starting to work with your brokerage. We don't really have a relationship with, because in every fraud that I've been involved in after the fact, where a carrier client calls us and goes, hey, this happened to us, or a broker, as soon as I make that phone call, I find out immediately, like, that guy doesn't work there. That rate con wasn't legitimate. And now it's too late. Now you got to work through all of these headaches to try to figure out what happened. But that is like the biggest preventative measure every driver and dispatcher. Because if I'm driving a truck, the last thing I want to do is go work for 3 days and then not get paid and then have to wait 3 months to call an attorney to go get half of my money. Like that one phone call is going to make sure, at the very least, I know I'm working with the company I think I'm working with.
Yes, sir. How do you guys pick? I have a question. How do you guys pick a carrier that you would think that, oh, I'm not going to get freight, I'm not going to get cargo theft with dealing with this carrier right here?
You talking
That's a
about
very
like
good
in
question.
general, what are our vetting steps?
Yeah.
So I'll give you personally what we use at my company. I'll try to generalize it without being too wordy and lengthy here, but we have a set of rules in our carrier vetting platform. We use Highway. So we've got a set of rules that we use. A lot of the basic stuff. Do they have an authority? Do they have insurance? You can set the age. Like, so we have a benchmark. Do they have a year of authority? And not to say we won't use someone if they're under a year, but it'll flag that if they're new. And then we have CSA scores that are set, and we're looking at, out of the 5 reportable CSA categories, we look at each of them and how they benchmark against the national average, and we set a threshold. In our case, it's if they are over the national threshold in 3 or more of the 5 categories, it's going to flag them, and they'll foul our basic rules. Again, if we want to, we can do more analysis and override that, but that we look at that. Then we look at do they have reports against them for cargo theft or stolen identity or double brokering or holding a load hostage, right? And those are basically like community notes that people, whether it's from picture like a freight guard, right? But those are internal to your vetting platform, whether it's Highway or Carrier Sure or whatever. And then we look at a bunch of other subjective stuff, like does this carrier have a VIN number on a tractor that was inspected recently but is not listed on their scheduled autos policy, which leads us to believe they potentially are running uninsured. A portion of their fleet might be uninsured, which is a prime example of how some carriers might be trying to cut corners and save on money. Is to, hey, I'll insure, some of my trucks, but not all of my trucks, right? So those are an example of some of the things we use on the front end. And then what we do is, depending on the load and the situation and the customer, we're probably going to have some sort of tracking requirement. It could be an ELD connection to Highway or to trucker tools. If they're ELD exempt, it could be, hey, we're going to use a tracking tool and require or request pictures at the dispatching location or at the pickup to ensure that the right carrier at the right, with the right truck and is in the right place at the right time. And this is all done for 2 reasons, right? One, it's to protect us, that we aren't hiring a bad actor or carrier. And number 2, it's to protect the carrier, to make sure that the person that we think we're booking and are paying is the person that is actually going to haul the load in that we're going to pay, and not somebody else.
Gotcha.
So that's what we do. It's a pretty lengthy thing. It is, for the most part, a lot of brokerages have this process automated now, right? Where carriers that don't meet basic criteria aren't going to get through. Whereas you'll have, maybe a new broker, or we'll put them in the bucket of bad broker that's not following these processes, and they might just book anybody and not do any vetting, because to them they're just like, oh, the rate looks good, let's book them, right? And because they don't know what they don't know. They haven't been burned yet. They haven't had a load stolen yet, or had a bad experience to force them to make that decision to have those processes. But in a nutshell, it's a pretty thorough process. A lot of it is automated, but we look at a lot of stuff and a lot of data points.
Okay, let me ask you this: does pay,
That's my
like,
company
is pay?
personally.
Oh, okay, got you. Does pay get involved? Like, would you? Not saying you personally. I'm just giving an example. Would you, as a broker, like, lowball a driver, and then, because that's what a lot of things are being said amongst us carriers at truck stops and stuff like that. A lot of carriers will say, well, if the broker paid more, they would. You ever heard that old saying, you get what you pay for? And a lot of carriers say,
Yeah,
if the broker paid
100%,
more.
right? So here, this brings up a really good point. So when we look at the bucket of good brokers versus bad brokers, right? Good
Mhm.
brokers are all about carrier relationships. And right, my first priority, if I have a load for my customer, I'm not going to post it to a load board and book a carrier that I've never talked to. My primary goal is, let me find a carrier that I've partnered with in the past that I have a good relationship with, that I know and I like and I trust, and I'm going to reach out to them and you know and I'm going to go that route first, right? I know them,
Mhm.
I have a good relationship and history with them, and a fair rate is going to give me peace of mind, right?
Yes.
Whereas
Yes.
bad broker, and again, bad might not be the right terminology there, but the not as the not as optimal brokers, they're transactional, right? They don't value long term partnerships with carriers, and they're gonna just go find the cheapest one, right?
Mhm.
Now, in the case that I gave you with all those vetting criteria that I went for, that I talked about earlier, if I've met all of that criteria, and these, let's say I've got two carriers and they both look ideal, but one's $100 cheaper because they don't have to deadhead as far. Well, that's the one I'm going to book most likely.
Mhm.
I don't have any
Mhm.
reason to pay somebody extra money for them to deadhead, because the reality is they're probably not the best. Well, they're not the best truck available for my load, and I'm not the best load available potentially for them for their truck. They might be able to find a load that they don't have to deadhead as far for. So
Mhm.
price obviously comes into it. It really does. And that's just the reality of the business is, because again, I'm also competing against other brokers to secure that shipment from the shipper. So if I come in at $100 higher to the shipper, well, then I don't get the load and that driver doesn't get the load. And then we both lose.
Correct.
So,
Correct. Yeah.
and
Gotcha.
that's just
And
one
and
example. But
here's
hey, if I have the load contracted and I'm going to get it either way, and two carriers are identical, but one just happens to be offering to take it for a little bit less for whatever reason, maybe they don't have as high of a truck note, or they don't have to head as far, or their insurance is a little bit cheaper. Well, then they have the advantage there, and that's just the reality of economics and business. But yeah, I would take the less expensive or the cheaper truck in that example.
Well,
Ben, I
yeah.
mean,
Well,
do you have any other?
a lot of the contract freight, that you guys have aren't on the load board as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's shippers that have moved completely away from contract freight just to book loads in the spot market because they know they're cheaper right now. And again,
Mm.
it always goes back to, I think, here's the thing I think that this really originates from, is that, like, I think the points of view and information are different for a broker than a driver and a dispatcher. And here's what I mean.
Mhm.
So say, like, we post up a load, any load, right? And you get 30, 40 trucks that all have the same safety rating, the same insurance, right? The same maintenance, the same crashing, the same everything we can see the FMCSA actually provides. From our point of view, like, they're all equivalent, right? So then we are looking at, what are the carriers asking to do this work for? And when all of them are coming in at, like, just your example, $1 a mile, and then one guy's like, well, I can't run for $1 a mile, I need $2 a mile, and he's absolutely correct, and I agree that he does need that. But there's no way I can get my customer to pay more money to just give one of them more because their truck is either
Mhm.
more expensive or their insurance or whatever that reason is. Especially when there's 25 other equivalent trucking companies that are saying, I'll take this for this number. So it's not that the broker is, like, lowballing the people they book. It's that they're generally sometimes just being honest with the dispatcher. Like, these are all the offers I have. Like, I'll use your truck, but, like, I can't pay more just because your company needs more than all of the other ones that are asking for it, right? Which goes back to the level playing field. The whole reason one needs more money is because they're doing things legitimately, and probably the other ones are just lying and defrauding the FMCSA, whether it's safety, hours of service, or insurance, which is a whole other conversation. But like from our point of view, like no one's trying to lowball anybody. Like we just want the best fit truck for that load with the money the shipper has budgeted for it, right?
Yeah, we don't
And
set the
then
market. I think there's a misconception from some carriers that they think brokers are setting the rates and lowballing people when the reality is we don't. It is supply and demand, and when there is an oversupply, you hear it blows my mind when you hear on the news like there's a driver shortage, and it's like a driver shortage. Like there is literally an oversupply of capacity right now. And again, that's a generalization because every lane or market is going to have differences there, but when you have an oversupply given the current demand to ship, rates go down. It's because if I'm a driver and I can either park my truck and make $0, or I can compete against all the other trucks in my area for the available loads, and we're gonna undercut each other, so some of us get loaded, right? And
Now,
that's just the real. It's the same thing. The same thing goes on the broker side, and shippers deal with it too, right? When in the heyday of COVID, when rates were through the roof because everyone was shipping stuff, and there was an undersupply of capacity, rates went through the roof, right? That is supply and demand, and nobody is setting that outside of the market itself and just pure supply demand economics.
yeah, I've always said, and I've basically been one of the only drivers out there that has said this, but we need it comes a point to where we need to stop blaming us as carriers. We need to stop blaming brokers, and we need to start looking at shippers as well, because shippers are the ultimate ones that do pay out the money. Um, but
Well, I mean, I would
also,
challenge you on that too,
well, I was just going
respectfully.
to say, oh yeah, that's cool. I was just going to say, with that being said, brokers do bid on the lanes. I think we had talked last week about, why is TQL so popular, because they bid low on lanes and they kind of squeeze out the profit margin for the carrier. Am I wrong?
Well, I'll tell you, the larger the brokerage, like a TQL or CH Robinson, for example, right? They have a very well-oiled machine when it comes to a procurement department, meaning everything on how they can find the best available truck that's out there. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So they have the amount of data they have, the people that are working in specialty roles, because their goal is I want to find the best truck at the best price who has the least deadhead and has the highest probability of getting this load delivered successfully, right? And if you have 4,000 brokers in your company and 30 years of historical proprietary data, you have an advantage to be able to meet that goal versus someone that just set up shop yesterday who's relying solely on, load board data. That's the argument that I would make there. And then on the shipper side, again, if you take the broker out of the equation, you get the same result here. The demand to ship is the shipper's freight outgoing, and the supply to haul that freight is the amount of capacity of motor carriers, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm a shipper and let's say I have 10 loads going out this week and there's 15 trucks available, well, those 15 trucks are going to be undercutting each other to secure their chance at hauling my 10 loads. If I
Yes.
have 10 loads available and there's only 5 trucks available, well, those 5 trucks know, based on that load to truck ratio, that they're going to be able to get a premium because that shipper is going to have to book all of them, and they have to then prioritize, well, what shipments do I want to get sent out and which ones am I going to have to roll to next week? So that supply demand thing, I would argue, still maintains. And I think the way that rates, I hate to use the phrase go up because it sounds negative to the consumer who has to ultimately pay for it, but it's to normalize them because they are suppressed and they're below where they should be right now. And it's great for the shipper who's saving money on costs, and it's great for the consumer who's not having to pay inflated transportation prices, but it's bad for the brokers and carriers and everybody that puts the pieces together that get that stuff shipped. It's bad for everyone in our environment because we're operating at compressed margins, and until either supply of capacity comes down or demand of shipping goes up, or they meet in the middle, in that supply demand curve. I don't that basically that's what it's going to take, either one or the other or both, and most likely it's going to
Yes,
be both over an extended period of time.
yes, sir. Yes,
That's
sir.
my take on that. Ben, I don't know if you have anything to add in. And
Here's
my
the
dog
thing I would
keeps
say
coming in
too,
and
right?
out of my office. That's why I
Yeah.
keep standing up here.
Is that like at the end of the day, even if you eliminated all the brokers and it was just the shippers and the carriers would literally be in the same position, right? Because shippers are in the business of selling whatever they manufacture, right? Whether it's basketballs, kayaks, cars, washing machines, it doesn't matter. They're in the business of making money selling that thing. Shipping is just an expense they have to pay that they don't want to, but they need to get their product to their customers, right? So their incentive is to pay the least amount. And on the carrier side, their incentive is to get paid the most amount. So the open market is supposed to determine the right number of each, as there's more or less goods, more or less carriers, right? But in the example that has happened was like rates went up so high, right? And the government got so freaked out that they relaxed all of the restrictions on drivers and CDLs and said, we need a whole bunch more of them. And then the narrative of we need more drivers, because they fixed a short-term problem by creating a longer-term problem. Meaning they fixed the fact that things were getting really expensive because we shipped too many things really quickly and unexpectedly. And then they increased the number of drivers just by lowering the standards and the enforcements and the regulations. And there's just a mass influx that kept getting bigger, and then it just kept rates down. Well, from the government's point of view, they're talking to all these companies and all these lobbyists that are like, this is great. These are the lowest shipping costs we've seen for this long ever. Keep it up, right? And then we're in this industry that everyone relies on, that no one pays attention to, going like, something really wrong is happening here. What is happening here? And then they just keep that narrative of like, oh, we're a driver shortage. We just got to keep letting in more drivers and keep giving more CDLs. And it's like, well, the people that have been in the industry for 30 years are going out of business. The guys that have been driving trucks for 30 years can't pay their bills. Like, this has never happened in 40 some years. Like, something is happening. And then when you really kind of look under the hood, it's like, well, you were talking about verifying carriers. Everybody relies on the FMCSA's information or some version of what they're regulating, like the ELDs, and they did that terribly. They are dealing with safety terribly. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 trucks on the road isn't even at the maintenance standards of the FMCSA. They aren't inspecting the drivers and carriers to make sure the bad ones are even keeping their maintenance up to be safe on the road, let alone verifying CDLs to make sure people have gone through training with programs like yours to know what they're doing to drive these vehicles. And they just, pun intended, just didn't have their hands on the wheel now for like 6-7 years, toward this problem has gotten so bad that I think carriers are frustrated, brokers are, shippers are happy because they got cheap rates. And then everybody just wants to point fingers at each other because, like, this is who we talk to the most, right? We talk to carriers, you guys talk to brokers, and we're both just like, what the hell is going on? Because even from our point of view, like, we're trying to bid loads to be able to get good carriers we've known sometimes for like decades. Like Nate or I have known for like 10 years, like, this is a good company. This lane should work for this. But the shipper is paying $1.10 a mile. Like, how in the hell is that economically possible? Like, the math just doesn't math. And then you see it everywhere and you're like, something is very wrong here that doesn't make any sense until you really look under the hood and see like, oh, it's not a level playing field. And a lot of these carriers that are undercutting the legitimate carriers are just able to do whatever they want because nobody was paying attention. And now we're starting to see these things come up because in the news, people are getting killed. And now all of a sudden they're like, okay, like this is worth us paying attention to because now the public is being involved in this. When everybody was saving money, no one in the government or in the economy seemed to give a shit about our industry. But now that they're starting to see some of the bad things that happen when you just literally let anybody do whatever they want, they're at least starting to address it, which hopefully gets better over time. But to me, this has been the underlying issue the entire time.
So I want to...
I agree with that. I do.
So I want to. I know we've kind of rambled on here, and I want to get to rate transparency before we go too long here. So, Avante, I will give you the floor here to give me your best argument as to why rate transparency should exist. So, as a broker, help me understand why we should be opening our books to carriers. Because my company has a trucking company, a sister company as well. So, we don't, on the trucking side, we're not advocating for transparency, but a lot of carriers are. So CFR 371.3C specifically. But give me your take on it. Why do you think that carriers should or brokers should be required to display, or I guess what is it, to disclose their shippers rates to the carriers?
Yeah. Well, number one, it says that, F 49 CFR 371.3C is a regulation that is on the books. It's been on the books, for a long time, number of years. We talked about it last week, how one of your guests was on months prior and, had broke down the whole situation of why it's on the books. But with it, in regards with it being on the books, some brokers, most brokers have it in the carrier agreement, the carrier packets, that we would have to waive our right to that if we agree to do business together, haul your loads or whatnot. And if we don't, then we several ties right there. We don't do business together. Or if we do, and then if we ask for it after, you know, you guys blackball us per se, and then put unjust freight guards and things of that nature. The perfect and prime example, for me, the example of all examples, the granddaddy of them all is the pink cheetah one. Where the old famous TQL, had went above and beyond and took above and beyond of what they were supposed to. And now they're putting up a huge fight. Even the judge that ruled in favor of TQL didn't rule in favor of TQL because they were happy for TQL. It was certain wording that the judge said, "Oh, I don't like that wording right there." And I just think it just becomes the overall playing over a good playing field, a fairness per se, and it builds trust. It builds a relationship. We are heavy regulated on the carrier side. Every little thing that we do gets scrutinized. But as far as the brokers, per se, it's not scrutinized. I've gone on record to say I want higher surety bonds, for you guys or whatnot, stuff like that, because we all know about MAP 21. MAP 21 is basically, it did nothing for the industry. It was a slap on the wrist. It did nothing for brokering or double brokering, per se. So, with that,
In
it just
theory, it did,
fairness.
but
And
in actuality, it didn't play out to do anything. Yeah, the intent behind it
yeah,
seemed like it was supposed to
yeah.
be good.
And then, then you have some brokers. I always say the bad brokers. You have some bad brokers out there that literally will take advantage of a carrier per se, like FTL, like a full truckload. There's a few brokers out there. I've talked to one of them that full truckload. If in your contract you say full truckload, and it's exclusive to 4 or 5 pallets, and then I get there and you added 3 more pallets because you got a full truckload, but you don't want to pay me for the extra weight for that commodity, that's not fair. But if you open up the books, I can see, oh, the shipper paid you how much for these pilots, for these extra 3 pallets, blah blah blah. So I'm just all about fairness. I'm all about building relationships, and I think that broker transparency will help do that across the
So the example you gave of the weight difference, I agree with you that if a broker contracts a motor carrier at a certain weight or pallet count or length, and then the carrier gets loaded for something in addition to that or above that, yeah, the broker should be paying more. I don't. Here's my take on broker
That
transparency,
happened
and
too, by the way.
I'm
That was
curious
a real
your.
example of the FTL.
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, there's freight that's loaded or that's booked in uh 100 weight, right? Like potatoes and onions,
Mhm.
it's per 50-pound bag or per 100 pounds loaded. Um, and that solves the problem of the, hey, we don't know how much it's going to weigh until it gets loaded issue. But you're right. If it's like, hey, the customer says, this is a 30-foot shipment, and I booked you for 30 feet of your trailer, and then you're going to partial, a second load on there and end up we load 40 feet and now it screwed up your other one. Yeah, that's on the broker. I think if the broker hires a carrier for their full truck dedicated, and it's more pallets than it was supposed to be, that doesn't bother me. But if the weight is different, it does, because then you're talking about fuel costs. So if they tell you it's going to be 40,000 pounds, we want your dedicated truck, and it's 40,000 pounds, and it still is the whole truck, but it's more pallets, I don't see a difference there. But if you're adding weight and cost to the carrier, then absolutely. So here's like your car that you're driving now. Did you buy it at a dealership?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Do you feel that we as consumers should be able to force the dealerships to tell us how much they bought that car for before they sell it to us?
I've heard this argument before based off of everything else. So I get what you're saying, but for sake of argument, I will say we don't do it, but I will say yes, we should.
We should. Okay, then we just have a difference of opinions then.
Yes, sir.
Our economy operates based off of supply and demand, and people will. Whenever someone says, well, what's this worth? It's whatever someone's willing to pay for it at any given point in time. That is kind of the general argument. I think when you look at mandating people opening their books across the board, that is a different philosophy of what our country's economics, of how our country's economics are set up in a,
here's a question.
In a free market.
The question I would ask too, Avante, is if carriers want to see what costs go into a load, right? It's not just the revenue on the load, it's the cost that it takes to get that load. You would agree, right? It's a business. Like the load just didn't come out of somewhere. That brokerage had to pay someone a salary to make phone calls, pay for technology to verify carriers, be able to train that person, keep the lights on in that business. So like the revenue that got paid per that load doesn't account for the costs. In the same way from the carrier's point of view, right? The revenue you got paid for your load doesn't account for, do you have maintenance? Are you paying legitimate salaries to your drivers? Do you have the right insurance? Did you maintain the reefer correctly? Have you been doing regular maintenance on your vehicle, right? So in the same sense that it's like, I get that from the carrier's point of view, they want to see the dollar that came in on that load, but it doesn't take into account any of the expenses to get the load. And then from the carrier's point of view, it's like, well, okay, I would also love to be able to see the carriers I'm working with. I'd like to see your maintenance books. I'd like to be able to see how long you've trained your drivers, what kind of CDL program they went through, how individually they've been for safety just with your company. And I'd like to be able to see how much you've borrowed as a trucking company to be able to run your business, because a business is not just the revenue, it's the revenue minus the expenses. So when we talk about a load, those are just the revenue numbers. That doesn't take into account all the money that gets invested to actually get the load. And I'll give you like the last point of view on this, because this is the thing I think is really different from the carrier side or the broker side. And I've worked with large trucking companies, and they'll say, I want to do more work with shippers directly. And I'm like, well, you should. Like, that is a good strategy and objective. Then they go, well, how do I do that? I'm like, well, hiring salespeople is expensive. You're going to need CRMs, phone lines. And oh, by the way, like even really good sales companies have to hire about 10 salespeople to find one that works out. So 9 of the people you're going to hire and train for 6 months are going to bring in no money, are absolutely going to end up getting fired in 6 to 8 months. But you're going to still have to pay for real estate, a computer, someone to find them, hire them, pay their insurance, train them, all for you to get one sales guy. And then they're like, well, how long is it going to take for me to get more business for my trucking company? I'm like, probably 8 to 12 months. And you're going to have to pay 10 people for 6 months, of which one will be working with you a year later, and you'll probably get one account. And they go, well, that math sucks. I can't afford to do that. And I'm not going to invest that amount of money to maybe get some business in the future. That's the gamble that brokerages spend to get the freight in the beginning that trucking companies can do, but usually do not do because of the risk, right? There's very different risk in sales on the trucking side versus the brokerage side. And all that goes into like, okay, well, how much does it cost to actually get the load in the first place? This is why brokerages tend to end up getting more shipper business and then having to find lots of carriers, where most carriers don't do it directly, because like you got to invest a lot of money or a lot of time to actually make thousands of phone calls to different shippers to follow up, to convince them to give you loads, to negotiate the rates, to make sure you get all that business and then line up all your trucks, right? So that's why you see most of the salespeople and all the risk it takes to hire, train them to find the ones that actually work out for your business. All that's an expense. There's a reason why lots of trucking companies don't just choose to do this, because you would have to invest tens of thousands of dollars per month for the better part of a year to get a couple accounts, maybe. And maybe you don't even get any a couple accounts after you spent $80,000-$90,000 that year, right? So like that's the other piece of like, what are the expenses in the business to do? Because business development or sales in any business is like one of the most expensive things. It takes a ton of time, a lot of rejection, and it's really hard to find people that can do that job well for a long period of time. That's why when you look at any company, like all of their money is spent in hiring, training, and firing salespeople that really don't work out to find one or two people that are really good.
I'll add in here too, the when you look at a from a carrier's perspective, you know, the pay on a load that's your revenue. That's what you're starting money is to work with to then pay for all of your other expenses and hope turn a profit, right? In brokerage, that profit, that is not actually what we take home. That is our revenue. Some companies even just call it their revenue, when in reality the revenue is what the customer is paying, but it's your brokerage revenue, or it's the load gross profit. That's your starting point before you start to pay for all your other expenses. So I looked this up this week. The average net profit percentage, meaning after all expenses paid, bottom of the income statement, the amount of profit that comes out of every dollar that goes through that company for a brokerage and a motor carrier are almost identical at about 5%. Meaning that for every dollar that, and again, you're going to have more profitable and you're going to have some that just can't manage their expenses or can't get the revenues up. But on average, every dollar that comes through a broker's door, 5 cents will be left as company earnings at the end of the day. That's your profit, right? And so I know the whole like 15% or 44% on the Pink Cheetah example. That's the gross profit. That's essentially the starting revenue to start paying expenses on, like insurance and training and IT and all the other things that Ben mentioned. And for every dollar that a trucking company gets paid, again, this is a gross simplification, 5 cents is what's actually made on that. So after paying for fuel and insurance and maintenance, et cetera. So about 5%, they're pretty even. So if a brokerage goes out of business, they did a bad job at bringing their revenue in, or they're spending too much money somewhere. If a brokerage is way above that 5%, well, they either did a really good job at keeping the revenues high and their expenses low, or a mix of both. And the same thing goes for a carrier. Carriers that go out of business likely aren't bringing in enough money to cover their expenses because they either overpaid for a truck, or they contracted with a shipper for rates that they didn't understand weren't going to be profitable for them, or they could be getting screwed by a broker. I mean, those are all possibilities, but expenses are what we can control as both brokers and carriers. And I think there is a lot of frivolous spending that was kind of hidden 4 years ago, right? 5 years ago, when rates were $3-4 a mile on average, that they either overpaid for stuff, they bought crap they didn't need, they hired people that really didn't need to be hired. And then as the market shifted back, just based off supply demand, they didn't adjust, right? And if the average broker is probably the average broker today, like the average individual working in brokerage today probably wasn't in the industry 10 years ago, right? So a lot of people, this is all they know is COVID and up to now, right? So they hadn't seen market shifts in the early 2010s and in 27 and 2018 into 19, and then obviously what we've seen now. But this stuff happens over time, right? Like the trucking company that that sister company to my brokerage, right? 5 years ago, we had 35 trucks running down the road. Today we have 7, right? We identified that it is not to operate the way we were operating wasn't as profitable, so we downsized and scaled back to the business that made sense for us for the company to stay profitable. And that's just a business decision. And the people that were driving with us that aren't with us anymore are either owner operators doing their own thing, or they're with a different fleet or whatnot. But we knew that based on what the market was doing and what we had the ability to change, we shifted our expenses and our operation to maintain a profitable business. Same thing with any brokerage, right? Any brokerage today has had to find ways to. We have increased costs on technology for vetting to prevent from fraud and theft and things of that nature, and we have to find ways to save money, and that becomes leveraging some technology to replace workforce, having to lean more in on sales, etc. It's business at the end of the day, and I kind of went down a tangent there, but the sample size of one load at 40-something%, I think is it's just not a sample. It's not a sample size. It's literally one load. And I gave the example earlier of a contracted lane that might have annual pricing, or maybe I'll give you a more realistic example. Let's say we're on a mini bid for a 30-day bid right now, and I've agreed to pricing. We all know what happens on Friday, Fallout Friday, right? A carrier is going to fall off more likely on a Friday than they will on a Tuesday or a Monday. So I might have, let's say I have $2,000 that the customer is paying me, and I contracted a trucking company for, let's say, $1,875, right? That carrier falls off because they found a higher paying load, and now the next available carrier is $2,500, and I committed to my customer, and I'm not going to lose that business, so I lose $500 on that shipment. That stuff is very, very normal and regular. If I pulled up my company's board right now, I'd be willing to bet that 8 to 10% of all of our loads that are booked right now are at a loss, and that's just the
that
reality
happens to
of
us.
business at scale. So the
That
sample
happens
size
to
of
us.
picking one out of the bucket, and you open it up and it's 40%. I bet there's some on our board that are at 40%. But the average is probably closer to like 12 to 15.
Yeah. That happens to us. When we don't get paid our tow news, our detention times, things like that, dealing with other brokers or whatnot.
And that's
That
a bad
happens to us
broker
a
right
lot.
there. That's
But
dirty.
then when you talk about like TQL, they hit for a one time thing, but you got to think that's once every hour or so. How many loads they move? They find, you know, they hit a nice, we say, quote unquote, lick. They hit a nice lick, for like once every hour. So, and then go back to what Mr. Benjamin was saying earlier. I've always proposed, me and some of my other trucker friends have proposed, what do you guys think about truckers need to take a business course before they become an owner operator? Or
We
independent
wrote
owner
one.
operator.
We wrote
Oh,
one. It's available for free through DAT's website. Yeah, they have DAT University. We wrote a freight broker course, and we literally wrote a course exactly for this, for owner operators and for
yeah.
drivers to be able to calculate their loads run, their expenses per mile, their revenue per mile, their
I love that.
profitability. So like you can access that right now through DAT for free. It took Nate and I like 8 months to write that course out.
I love that. I love that. I love that because there's a lot of truckers, there's a lot of carriers out there that don't know proper business. Like back to Mr. Nate's point earlier when he was like, in COVID, there was a lot of frivolous spending going on. If we would have, if we have, as carriers would have saved that money, invested it in sales or whatnot, found logistics coordinators at these shippers, went and built relationships with them, bought trailers. We all know a lot of shippers like trailer pools or whatnot. We could go out and get our own our own shippers or whatnot, our own lanes and stuff like that. But the average trucker, and this is where I speak up and I'm fair, the average trucker out there is lazy.
Here, I would say this. I would take a different point of view on this. And here's where and why. Like, Steven, who's our producer, they're heavily involved in the asset side. Family has for decades, right? And the interesting thing is that like we looked into some of the trucking associations. I can't remember which one it was, but there are like hundreds of carriers at the meeting Steve was at. And he was telling us like 90% of them all have a brokerage authority and just don't do anything with it. Because there's nothing preventing a trucking company owner from also being a broker. But what happens is, and I've worked with a lot of them where they've reached out and said, hey, I want to get this brokerage off the ground, right? And it's the same conversation I said earlier. I'm like, okay, here's the amount of money you're going to have to invest in order to get this off the ground. Or you're going to have to find someone that does everything you do all day, and you are just going to have to hammer the phones for the next 4 to 6 months until you can get some customers in. And it's probably going to be a year before that brokerage is even close to breaking even. So you can either allocate, 100 to 200 grand to get this brokerage off the ground quickly, or you can spend a year and a half, find someone else that can take everything off your plate, and you got to hammer the phones every day until you can build this out. And what all of them decide is like, well, no, like I would rather be on the trucking side. There's less risk. There is less risk, right? Like there's different risk profiles to brokerage versus carriers. And there's nothing ever preventing carriers from also being a broker. It's that when they come to that point of having to make that decision of either investing a significant amount of time and effort or a significant amount of money into hiring other people to do it, they go, it makes more sense for me to just buy a couple more trucks and keep building this business. So there's tons of dormant MCs owned by trucking companies, like literally thousands of them that just don't ever operate because like this is what goes into that business that is very different than the trucking business. And I don't think it's miseducation. It's just that like they're very different businesses. How they make money, the risk profile, how and when you lose money, they're just not the same. They're both involved in moving things, but they're just very different risk profiles as businesses.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what's the risk? Because the risk to me just sounds like, oh, I got to spend time and a little bit of money. I mean, 100 to 200, back in the COVID days was nothing, but I just got to spend time building relationships versus jumping in a truck and driving a truck when somebody could cut me off and I'm more at risk of having an accident and losing my life. I'm just talking about truckers because how many you guys
That's
go to
it.
broker carrier summits and things like that? How many carriers you guys see at the broker carrier summits? How many carriers do you guys see at these conferences and things like that? And I'm trying my best to get carriers to come out to these broker carrier summits and whatnot. But like I said, the average carrier, oh no, I'm gonna go home and spend time with the kids. I'm gonna go home and spend time with the wife, or I'm gonna get on this road and run this load, or I'm gonna go take a trip to Barbados or something like that. When we as carriers don't invest back into ourselves. This is me talking to the carrier.
Yeah, all pretty true. I mean, and also people are different. And it's not just a matter of like intellect. Some people just have different priorities and preferences. Like, I remember asking my dad this. My dad worked in construction his whole life. I was in business school at the time, working in construction in the summer. And I'm like, Dad, why in the hell are you not running this business instead of running the crews on the job sites? My dad used to tell me, he's like, I don't want that stress. I don't want to worry about my job when I'm not at my job. I want to show up, do a job that I enjoy, make a good living, and go home and be with my family. He's like, the guy who owns the business, Rick, he's working 18 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week for months, trying to make sure we have enough business to keep us busy. He's like, I don't want his life. I want my life. That's my preference, right? And it's not always about like intelligence. It's just like, what choices do you want to make and how much risk or things do you want to spend your time on, right? We all have a limited amount of hours in the day, and some people just choose to do things differently based on what's important to them. And that also changes over time. Somebody that might take a lot of risk in their 20s doesn't want to in their 30s, or vice versa. Like, that's what's unique about, all the different people in the economy.
I will say this too, and then I want to wrap up on a glimmering positive note.
Okay.
So I'll say this first though, that if you're a carrier out there and you're disgruntled and upset and think brokers are stealing your money, there is nothing stopping you from going right back to that FMCSA website and paying $300 and getting your brokerage authority. You can hop onto the thief side if you'd like to, if that's what you think is happening. But here's I want to end on a positive here. So we talked through a lot, right? And I think back to my example of 2019 when I talked about the animosity between brokers and carriers, and I wish we basically, to sum it up, like, why can't we all just get along? Avante, what speaking to the audience, brokers and carriers, what would you say or advise to put us a step in the right direction of having a harmonious relationship? Because the reality is we need each other. Brokers need carriers.
Yes.
Brokers cannot service their customers without the carriers that are doing the hard work of driving long hours and being away from their family. And small carriers that don't have a sales team and direct customer relationships heavily rely on brokers to keep them loaded and rolling. So what would you say to folks out there to take us a step in the right direction?
Yes, sir. My thing that I want to see happen in the future is I want to see brokers and carriers come together. But the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we take it upon ourselves to put ourselves in each other's shoes. You know, the carrier, stop pointing the finger. Get you a good relationship with the broker and start putting yourself in their shoes and not only seeing things from their standpoint of view, but also educating yourself as well. And from the broker standpoint, stop pointing your finger at the carrier. Put yourself in their shoes. Look at their perspective. Look at their risk. Because like you said, without each other, we don't exist, and we need to come together and have a very good kumbaya moments, in the future, because you guys need us just as much as we need you. And I think it's time for
For
both
sure.
parties to stop pointing the blame at each other and let's work together and find a common ground.
Agreed. I always tell people, like I talked about transactional brokers earlier. Um, if you're a broker, I would highly encourage you to take the extra time when you're talking to a carrier and find out what does their fleet look like. Where do they prefer to drive? What does it take for you to help find them a load to get them back home so they can get to their kid's soccer game, and just work together and mutually go get more business, right? And everybody helps everybody out. So
I got another
um,
one.
go
How
ahead.
about the freight broker jump in the truck and take a ride with the trucker one day, a whole day, and sleep at a truck stop and take a shower at a truck stop and eat at a truck stop.
Exactly. And there's a reason, Avante, that I work on the brokerage side now and no longer on the carrier side. I did not enjoy sitting in a truck. I worked on a dock for a number I worked in the office, I worked on the dock, and I did ride-alongs too. I've done customer visits. I've done a lot of this stuff on the carrier side, and there is a reason that I enjoy the brokerage side more. It's a preference. I like to
Yes, sir.
be behind a computer and not in the truck or on the dock. So, but yeah,
Yes, sir.
agreed. I think that's a huge thing. If you are even if you're a broker and go visit your customer, there's going to be trucks there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to some of the drivers that are there and get their perspective. I had one, and I won't tell the whole story and waste time here, but there's a lot of frustration about drivers are they're showing up late and to the wrong place and all this stuff, and then the customer's docking money, and the drivers get pissed off that they're getting docked money, and then we go to the location, and the customer has the most confusing facility in the world, and all we had to
Yeah.
do was take some pictures and make a little thing to text out to the driver. Hey, here's what you're going to see. Make sure, I know it says this, but you want to turn left down
Yeah.
this driveway in their facility to get to the correct location to check in, right? So yeah, I mean, I highly encourage all that stuff. Put yourself in everybody else's shoes and get a different perspective and a paradigm shift. So CDL Shorty, Avante Jackson, we appreciate having you on. Where can folks find you and your content online?
Thank you. Thank you once again, both of you guys, Mr. Nate and Mr. Benjamin, for having me on. People can find me on Instagram at avjackson28. You can find me on YouTube at CDL Shorty. Um, things of that nature. And then one last thing I want to leave you with, guys, is I know a lot of people are talking about non-domicile and domicile CDLs and crashes and things of that nature. But I want you guys to really look into and educate yourselves on underride crashes. Underride crashes are starting to become a thing that nobody's talking about. An underride crash is when a car goes up underneath a tractor trailer and dies. And it's been a lot of American caused underride crashes versus non-domicile and domicile CDLs, which NHTSA, OIDA, and everybody else has helped covering it up. Did you guys know that only 14 states out of 51 only recognize underride crashes? So that is a statistic right there that's climbing up in the ranks that nobody's talking about. So when we talk about, we talk about safety and things of that nature. That's one thing that we need to talk about, because Wabash got sued. The trailer manufacturers, they got sued over it. NHTSA's helping cover it up. State troopers, on their accident report, they don't even have a thing to say this is an under-ride crash. So in order to actually find out if a crash is an under-ride crash or not, you have to really go into the NHTSA database, because they don't have it marked as under-ride crashes, and that's for
Interesting. All right. Well, we appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. And Ben, any final thoughts?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills.